Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IS English. In our today's video, we'll try to understand why was US government in shutdown mode for 43 days and why has such a scenario never happened in India. So is it by chance that Indian government has never shut down or is it by political structure? That is what we are going to find out in our today's video. Now, the notes that I will be using in this session, in case if you want to download them, you can go to a particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live and download it from there. And while you're at it, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also. So let us start by understanding the context of our today's discussion. Now, on Wednesday, US President Donald Trump signed a bill which ended the longest ever shutdown in the US government history. This was a shutdown that continued for 43 days, which was about 9 days more from the previous shutdown or the previous longest shutdown that also happened in the first tenure of US President Donald Trump. So why is this shutdown a common phenomena in US politics? And why it isn't happening in India? That is where we are going to find out in our today's discussion. Now, what does this word shutdown essentially mean? It essentially means that US government and all its agency do not have any money that they are going to spend to meet their expenditure obligations of running a government. Now, whenever a government is unable to spend the money that it has gotten out of taxation, it essentially would cripple any economy for that matter. And essentially, this is a very big deal because US is world's largest economy. So that is why this shutdown is a very important discussion that we are going to have today. But before moving forward with this discussion, you need to understand the fundamental difference in the political structure of US and India. Now, US follows a presidential form of government, right? And this is in close contrast with India because in India, we follow parliamentary system of government. So this shutdown that we are going to understand today, this is a feature of presidential form of government. And why it can't happen in India? It can't happen in India because India follows the parliamentary structure of government. So we are going to understand, first of all, the possibility of this shutdown happening in US, what is the budgetary process of US, and then we'll move on to understanding the fact why this kind of a shutdown can't happen in India. Okay, so let us start by first understanding the importance of this topic. Now, if you look at the previous year questions of UPSC Prelims, for example, in 2013, a question directly appeared in parliamentary form of government. And this trend has continued multiple times, so much so that read this 2017 question. This directly asks you what is the main advantage of the parliamentary form of government. So you should be able to solve this question only after you get all the aspects of parliamentary form of government clear in your mind. And what we are going to understand today is how budgetary process actually happens in presidential and parliamentary form of government. Understood? So we are not just understanding this from the perspective of UPSC prelims, but we are also going to get into detail in order to understand this topic from an analytical point of view, if and all a question comes in the UPSC mains examination GS paper 2. Okay. So let us start by understanding what is a shutdown after all. Now, you need to understand the basic principle of how government earns and spends money. Now, the biggest chunk of government's earning or government's revenue comes from the taxes that it levies on the citizens of that country. And any democratic government, in order to spend that money on expenditure obligations, it needs to take the permission of the people of that country. And essentially, this means that they have to take the permission of representatives of those people who sit in that respective country's parliament. So this is the very basic essence of a democratic form of government, which is common in India as well as US. Now, a shutdown, it does not mean that the government of US, for that matter, does not have any money. Yes, it has plenty of money, but shutdown essentially means that the government of US does not have the permission of the people or permission of the parliament to spend the money that it has collected by taxation. So, it does not mean that the US government has no money. This is not the meaning of shutdown. It means that the US government does not have the permission of its representatives and therefore they are unable to spend this money. This is what the shutdown essentially means. Now, before we compare the political structure of these two countries, you need to understand the size of money involved in US's budget. For example, in the financial year 2025, the US government collected total money from its citizens from various sources of revenue, which amounted to $5.2 trillion. And its total outlays or expenditures, these were $7 trillion. So when any government spends a lot more money than it earns, it means it has to borrow money in order to meet its expenditure obligation. And this borrowing of money that any government does every year, this is called as fiscal deficit. So from this discussion, we understand that the US government is having the fiscal deficit of $1.8 trillion in the financial year of 2025, which amounts to 5.9% of total GDP of US. And this trend of increasing borrowing is an alarming figure in the US politics, because US has had an average deficit of 3.8%, which is about 2.1% more or 2.1% less than what its fiscal deficit is this year. Now, to put things in perspective, you need to understand that the total expenditure of Indian government is $0.6 trillion, and the size of Indian economy is less than the total budget of the US government. India's economy size is somewhere around $4 trillion. So this is how the state or the budget of US compares to that of India. US's budget or US's total expenditure is more than 10 times of that of India. US's expenditure in total is $7 trillion, and the central government's total expenditure in India is $0.6 trillion, right? Now let us understand what is the process of passing the budget in US. Now in US, it follows the fiscal year concept similar to us, but the fiscal year or the time period of fiscal year is very different in US as compared to India. In India, a fiscal year starts from April the 1st and it continues till March the 31st until next year. So this is the financial year in India. Financial year in US, in contrast, runs from October the 1st to September the 30th. So any government in US needs to have its budget approved before the start of this financial year, that is before the start of October the 1st. And if US government fails to pass this budget in the floor of US Congress, that is both US House of Representatives and US Senate, it means that it won't have any money to spend after 1st of October, leading to the phenomena of shutdown. So this is what shutdown means in US. When US government has the money but it does not have the permission to spend this money, it would lead to shutdown of the government. And this happens when US government is unable to pass the budget before 1st of October. So naturally, you need to understand that the budgetary process in US starts much earlier than the start of financial year, that is from much before the October the 1st. So what is the process of passing the US budget? Now this US government's budget originates from the office of US President, and it starts from first Monday of the month of February, which is more than 10 months before. Now after this budget is moved outside the US office of president, this goes to US Congress. And you need to understand US Congress includes two houses. The upper house is called as US Senate, which is similar to Rajya Sabha in India. And the lower house in US Congress is called as House of Representatives, which is similar to Lok Sabha in India. Now, after this budget moves from office of US President to the US Congress, it goes through a series of negotiation that happens between the two organs of the government, that is legislature and executive, right? So this negotiation of how much to spend, on whom to spend, how much to tax and whom to tax, these kind of decisions is subjected to political negotiations between legislature and executive, right? So this is how budget originates from office of US President, and for its approval, it is sent to US Congress. And before giving the approval, US Congress would negotiate various provisions of budget with the US government, which is led by the executive, that is President of United States. Now, when this budget reaches or is subjected to voting in the floor of US Congress, you need to understand US follows a very different kind of a political structure. We all know that in democratic form of government, there is a thing called a separation of powers, whereas different organs of the government, be it legislature, executive and judiciary, they have respective floor or respective spheres of influence. And in US-like polity, which follows a presidential form of government, there is a strict segregation of work that is provided to legislature, executive and judiciary, right? So this segregation of spheres of influence in these three forms of government is watertightly separated from each other, and this is a feature of presidential form of government. So this is essentially a feature of presidential form of government, but it also leads to certain kind of problems. What is this problem? We are going to understand this. Now in US, the executive as you can understand from this diagram, they are not part of legislature, unlike India. So what happens when executive is not a part of legislature? It automatically means that if president wants this budget to get passed, it automatically won't get passed in the legislature. To pass the budget, the executive needs the permission of legislature. So there is a possibility if legislature is ruled by different party as the president of United States, or even if they are ruled by similar party as the president of United States, but they don't have the required votes to pass this budget won't pass at all. So to pass the budget in United States, it is the responsibility of legislature, and if legislature decides, it can decide not to pass the budget which is provided to them by the executive. So if budget proposed by the president is not passed, in US, they do not have to resign, but it essentially means that the government of United States, the federal government, it has no other option but to shut down. So this is the feature of presidential form of government. Now, why this deadlock actually happened in United States, you need to understand the politics behind it. Now, shutdowns in US government actually happens when members of two parties, that is Republican and Democrats, they do not agree on the proposals which is sent by the president in the budgets. So in the recent instance, what happened that Republicans, although they control both houses of the US Parliament, the Senate as well as House of Representatives, but to pass this budget in Senate, they did not have the required number of votes, that was 60 votes. And the other party, that is Democrats, essentially the opposition party in United States, they were trying to block this budget. Now, when this deadlock happened, it only happened because 8 Democratic representatives, they voted for the US budget, and then only this budget was supposed to end and this shutdown ended. So, shutdown, if it happens in United States, it can only end in case if the party does not have the required number, in case cross voting happen, which is quite common in US, provided they have a bipartisan consensus on a particular issue. So this was the problem associated with the US system of government. Now, our biggest question is, can this shutdown actually happen in India? Right now, let me tell it to you, this shutdown can't ever happen in India. And this is not because of any chance. This is because of our political structure. Now, India follows a completely different form of government as compared to United States. I told you, United States follows a presidential form of government, and we Indians, we follow Westminster form of parliamentary government. And in Westminster form of parliamentary government, there is essentially a separation of power, that is legislature, executive and judiciary. They have their respective spheres of influence. But what happens in India, legislature and executive, they intersect in between, because as you can understand, the council of ministers, who are essentially the ministers in the union government, they have no other option but they have to be members of parliament. They can be either members of Lok Sabha and they can be either members of Lok Sabha or Raj Sabha. And these council of ministers are collectively responsible to the legislature of the house. So because of this instance, that executive is formed only out of the members of legislature, this ensures a harmonious relationship by structure between the two organs of the government, that is legislature and executive. You need to understand, a government can only stay in power if they have majority amount of seats, that is equal to or more than 272 seats in Lok Sabha. And to pass a budget, you also require vote more than or equal to, that is majority of seats in Lok Sabha, that is 272 seats. So these are the common conditions which you require for your government to function and to pass a budget. So if you have to pass a budget, it essentially means that you need to have a majority in the lower house of Indian Parliament, Lok Sabha. So if theoretically Indian government can't pass the budget, it essentially means that the Indian government led by Prime Minister would have to resign from office. So this is the reason why in India the budget can't be, or the budget needs to be approved, and that is why we won't face shutdown ever. So in India, the executive is a part of legislature, and the government, which is headed by Prime Minister, stays in power as long as they enjoy majority in the floor of Lok Sabha, that is the majority of equal to or more than 272 seats. Now what you need to understand, that In India, the government has to stay in power, and for that, they need to have at least 272 seats. And this is the exact condition you require the government to pass a budget. So if the government theoretically is not able to pass a budget, it would mean that the government has lost the trust of the House and the Prime Minister has no other option but to resign from office. So ever you won't hear the case that Indian government has faced shutdown because of lack of approval of the Parliament to the Union government's budget. Now, there are many people in India who want India to have a presidential form of government, right? But is this ideal for India? According to me, it isn't. You know why? Because this kind of an episode of shutdown, if it were to happen in India, India needs to have a presidential form of government. So this is one of the challenges that the presidential form of government faces, that it is deeply susceptible to breakdown in governance if the legislature and the executive can't agree on equal or unanimous proposals. And this is one of the beautiful aspects of parliamentary system of India. Yes, I know parliamentary system of India has many flaws, but this is not one of the flaws, because parliamentary system of governments in India, it allows the government to function without a break, that there is no case or there would be no shutdown in Indian government because of the structure of polity that I've understood you just now. Okay, so this is what our today's discussion was all about. Now let us move to the practice question that I gave you at the start, which is essentially a PYQ. In context of India, which one of the following principles is or are implied institutionally in the parliamentary governance? Members of the cabinet are members of the parliament, feature of parliamentary governance. Ministers hold office till they enjoy confidence in the parliament. Essentially, if they have majority or the government has majority in the parliament, this would mean they have confidence of the house. So this is also the correct answer. Cabinet is headed by the head of state. Incorrect. It is headed by head of government. Head of state in India is president. Head of government in India is prime minister. So third statement isn't right. First and two is right. Option A is your right answer. Now moving to the second question. There is a parliamentary form of government in India because which of the following options is the right answer? Lok Sabha is elected directly by the people, not correctly. Parliament can amend the constitution, not. Raj Sabha cannot be dissolved, no. Council of Ministers is responsible to the Lok Sabha. This is the right answer because in parliamentary form of government, the executive emerges out of the legislature. That to be a part of executive, to be one of the ministers, you need to be a member of parliament. It can be either of the houses, either Lok Sabha or Raj Sabha. Moving to the next question, which appeared in 2017, the main advantage of parliamentary form of government is that the executive and legislatures work independently. No, this is a feature of presidential form of government, which is true in case of US, not in case of India. It provides continuity to policy and more efficient, right? The executive remains responsible to the legislature, good. The head of the government cannot be changed without election. It can be changed without election if they lose majority. So these two are options, but the main advantage of parliamentary form of government, that is better options out of these two, is executive remains responsible to legislature. Option C is your right answer. So you can understand the last two questions are essentially the same questions, albeit in different words. In 2020, a parliamentary system of government is which all political parties in the parliament represented in the government. Not correct. The government is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by it. The government is elected by the people and can be removed by them. Not correct. The government is chosen by parliament and cannot be removed before completion of fixed term. No, this is a feature of presidential form of government. So option B is your right answer because government is responsible to parliament. If they lose majority, the parliament would essentially remove the government. So this is the practice question that you have to ensure. And before ending today's discussion, this is the where you'd find the notes. The channel is called as ATS Live. So please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you have troubles finding it, this is the QR code you can scan. So I'll take your permission. Please have a very good night.